Welcome to Last Week Pod News. Here are last week's highlights from the Joe Rogan Experience.
In this episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, Joe sits down with Michael P. Masters to explore the extratempestrial theory and the evolving cultural narrative surrounding UFO disclosure. Joe Rogan and Michael P. Masters begin by discussing the cultural history of UFO interest and the slow process of disclosure. They suggest that the gradual normalization of these ideas in media and government prepares humanity for the reality of advanced beings. Masters describes the Vadoma tribe in Zimbabwe, known for a genetic condition that results in feet with only 2 large toes. This conversation serves as an anthropological case study on how physical traits evolve and adapt within isolated human populations. Michael introduces his extratempestrial hypothesis, proposing that aliens are actually human descendants from the distant future traveling back in time. He notes that reported alien features such as large heads and minimal muscle mass align with projected human evolutionary trends. Masters explains the block universe model of physics, which suggests that past, present, and future all exist simultaneously as a fixed structure. This model allows for time travel to the past without creating traditional paradoxes, as the traveler's actions were always part of history. The guest discusses declining fertility and sperm counts in modern humans as a potential motive for future return missions. Michael posits that our descendants might travel back to harvest wild-type genetic material to fix reproductive crises caused by long-term technological dependence. Joe brings up Bob Lazar's claims regarding the government's possession of advanced craft at Area 51. Masters considers how his theory fits into this narrative, suggesting that recovered technology might actually be human-made machinery from a future era. Michael P. Masters and Joe Rogan discuss the overwhelming amount of fake content and AI-generated misinformation on social media platforms. They note how bots and propaganda efforts erode critical thinking and consensus intelligence in society, making it difficult to discern reality. The discussion moves to government cover-ups, specifically the JFK assassination and the suspicious deaths of witnesses and whistleblowers. Michael and Joe explore how institutional control of the media and the threat of execution for treason keep major secrets buried. Masters elaborates on the potential of zero-point energy to provide infinite power, while Rogan warns of its destructive potential as a weapon. They reflect on the dark night of the soul humanity faces as technological advancement outpaces emotional and institutional maturity. Joe reviews CT scan data of tridactyl mummies from Peru, which appear to show advanced biological structures like embryos and metallic implants. Masters remains cautious, citing the history of hoaxes in the region and the need for rigorous archaeological provenance to distinguish between dolls and biological specimens. Michael explains that ancient cultures often modified skulls to emulate gods, which complicates the identification of these remains. He and Rogan discuss the ethical dilemmas of grave robbing and the scientific necessity of studying remains in their original context to confirm their origin. Joe Rogan and Michael P. Masters discuss a vivid dream involving humanoid beings with yellow-toned skin and slender builds. Joe explains that they communicated telepathically, attempting to calm him down during the encounter. Masters notes that the environment described, specifically the non-point source lighting, is a common feature in many reported UFO encounters. Masters recounts a strange event from 2022 where he felt he was abducted at a UFO conference. He describes being led to a balcony where a man seemingly channeled entities that knew his private thoughts about quitting his work. Michael felt this was an intentional effort by the entities to encourage him to continue his research. Michael details a moment during his encounter where entities asked to place information in his brain for future use. He describes a sensory blackout followed by a massive stream of information, which felt overwhelming but not painful. This download left him physically drained, resulting in a 13-hour sleep and a period of emotional release upon waking. The conversation shifts to the famous 1961 abduction of Betty and Barney Hill. Rogan plays a chilling audio recording of Barney under hypnosis, highlighting the genuine terror expressed in his account. Masters reflects on the bravery required for the couple to come forward during that era, given their interracial status. Masters asks Joe why comedians seem particularly drawn to the study of UFOs. Rogan explains that comedians are less concerned with social stigma and more willing to investigate unconventional truths. He notes that while other professionals might fear for their reputations, performers often thrive on exploring shunned topics. Joe shares a theory that humanity's purpose is to act as a biological precursor to artificial intelligence. Masters listens as Rogan suggests advanced beings might observe us because our primate-driven desires lead to technological breakthroughs. Joe describes humans as an electronic caterpillar, building a digital cocoon. Moving forward, we look at Joe Rogan's conversation with Tom Segura, where they dive into Tom's physical transformation and the benefits of a morning workout routine. Tom Segura describes his dramatic weight loss, moving from a peak of 265 pounds down to 187 pounds. He explains how much better he feels physically and his commitment to a consistent weightlifting routine. Joe Rogan notes that such a transformation requires significant discipline, especially when maintaining a busy lifestyle. Segura outlines his strict nutrition plan, which includes eating 4 high-protein meals a day and carefully cycling carbohydrates. He details his early morning schedule, waking up at 5:30 a.m. to train before heading to a writer's room. Rogan discusses the importance of these habits for long-term health and productivity. The discussion turns to how intense exercise, particularly cardio, helps silence internal mental chatter and improves focus. Rogan highlights the psychological benefit of achieving a win early in the day through physical exertion. Segura notes that he feels a distinct difference in his mental state on days when he skips his workout. Rogan and Segura explore the reasons why some individuals struggle to find success, often due to a fear of being uncomfortable. They discuss how modern distractions make it easy to avoid the hard work necessary for career growth. Segura observes that many people in their 40s are now struggling because they failed to focus earlier in life. Segura admits that he has never seen many popular sitcoms like The Office, explaining that he prefers watching dramas to escape his work environment. He finds that being surrounded by comedy all day makes him crave different types of storytelling for entertainment. Rogan shares similar experiences, noting how industry professionals often avoid their own genre during downtime. Segura posits that every man should try combat sports or intense yoga at least once to gain a realistic understanding of their physical capabilities. He believes that many people underestimate the technical skill required for fighting until they are humbled in a controlled environment. Rogan emphasizes that experience in these fields changes how one perceives potential threats and conflict. The conversation shifts to parenting and the observation that children often display innate personality traits from a very young age. Segura compares his 2 sons, noting that one is naturally competitive and driven, while the other is more laid back. Rogan discusses how these observations highlight the significant role genetics play in shaping an individual's character. Rogan describes the extreme drive of ultra-marathon runners and athletes like David Goggins, who push themselves to the brink of physical failure. They discuss the psychopath mentality required to ignore pain and continue competing under dire circumstances. Segura recalls his own experiences with high-intensity training and the mental battle to stay competitive. Rogan evaluates the boxing career of Jake Paul, praising his technical progress, but expressing concern over the long-term effects of head trauma. He explains that even successful fighters face a punch card of damage that eventually takes a toll on the brain. Segura acknowledges the bravery required to fight, but agrees that the physical risks are immense. Moving forward, Joe Rogan welcomes Jay Anderson to discuss alternative history and the fascinating theory that extraterrestrials might actually be humans from the future. They also dive into a detailed analysis of the mysterious Nazca mummies found in Peru. Joe Rogan welcomes Jay Anderson to the show to discuss his research into alternative history. Jay explains his focus on ancient civilizations, mysterious megalithic sites, and the possibility of extraterrestrial involvement. Joe expresses his long-standing interest in these topics, noting how they challenge conventional historical timelines. Joe discusses a previous conversation regarding the theory that aliens are actually future humans, traveling back in time. Anderson notes that this perspective is grounded in anthropological changes and physiological evolution observed over long periods. They explore the idea that gray aliens could represent a specialized version of the human lineage. Jay describes his investigation into the tridactyl mummies discovered in Peru. He highlights that advanced scans reveal internal biological features like heart valves and bone cartilage, suggesting they are authentic rather than modern hoaxes. Anderson emphasizes that the presence of eggs or fetuses inside these beings complicates the narrative of them being simple fabrications. The discussion turns to the stark contrast between Inca masonry and the far more advanced megalithic work found at sites like Sacsayhuaman. Jay observes that the older, more precise stones often show signs of geological trauma, suggesting they predate the Inca civilization by a significant margin. Joe notes the visual evidence of softened stone that appears squished together like marshmallows. Anderson details the Chincana project, which has uncovered precision-carved stone blocks buried deep beneath Cusco. This project lends credence to Andean legends of a vast subterranean labyrinth connecting various sacred valleys and mountain ranges. Jay shares his experience seeing these blocks firsthand, which suggests a massive, forgotten infrastructure. Rogan criticizes the institutional gatekeeping that prevents new evidence from being accepted in archaeology. They discuss how findings related to fire usage and anatomically modern humans continue to push the timeline of civilization back hundreds of thousands of years. Joe argues that mainstream academia is often too arrogant to admit when established models are broken. Jay proposes that some human or hominid lineages might have moved underground to escape surface-level cataclysms. He references the underground city of Derinkuyu and Hopi legends of ant people who sheltered humans during times of disaster. Anderson suggests these subterranean societies could have maintained their culture while surface populations regressed. The pair discusses the mathematical and astronomical precision found in Neolithic monuments like Stonehenge. Anderson questions the mainstream narrative that simple hunter-gatherers could possess such advanced geodetic knowledge. He points out that these structures are often aligned with electromagnetic concentrations in the Earth's crust. New scanning technologies like synthetic aperture radar are discussed as tools for uncovering hidden history. Jay explains how these scans have mapped unknown chambers in the Great Pyramid and massive structures buried kilometers deep. Joe finds it fascinating that such data is often met with hostility by mainstream scholars. Anderson explores the theory that the Great Pyramid was a functional energy plant rather than a tomb. He discusses the land of Chem and the chemical roots of Egyptian civilization, suggesting the pyramids used resonance and chemicals to generate power. They also examine iron ore veins on the Giza Plateau that may have served as part of a global electrical network. Joe highlights the logistical difficulty of primitive workers lifting 80-ton granite blocks to the top of the pyramid. Jay adds that the King's Chamber is acoustically tuned to specific frequencies that can influence human brainwaves. They speculate that the chamber served a technological or initiatory purpose rather than a funerary one. The Osirion in Abydos is described as a megalithic structure designed to interact with the local water table. Anderson suggests that the site may have functioned as a hydraulic pump, as it remains perpetually flooded despite attempts to drain it. He notes that the lack of inscriptions in such functional sites distinguishes them from later dynastic Egyptian temples. Rogan explains how the university system creates a bottleneck where academics are discouraged from exploring fringe theories for fear of losing funding. He suggests that the existence of the pyramids acts as an intelligence test that many modern thinkers fail by ignoring the obvious engineering anomalies. Jay agrees that alternative media is finally allowing these suppressed ideas to reach a wider audience. Joe Rogan and Jay Anderson discuss a report of a Yeti sighting at a Russian space center. They contemplate whether Sasquatch could be a descendant of Gigantopithecus or perhaps an interdimensional being. The pair examines the prevalence of Bigfoot stories across various Native American tribes. Rogan notes that many tribes have distinct names for the creature, which differentiates it from other mythical or purely symbolic animals. Anderson shares how a period of depression led him to study metaphysics and consciousness. He credits the book series Conversations with God for shifting his understanding of divinity away from traditional patriarchal views. Jay explains the CE5 protocol for initiating contact with non-human intelligence. He describes his own experiences in 2019, where he witnessed strange lights and orbs that appeared to respond to his mental intent. The discussion turns to the possibility of intelligent life existing as self-organizing plasma in the vacuum of space. Rogan brings up the STS-75 tether mission footage as potential evidence of anomalous objects interacting with human technology. Jay Anderson explains that alchemy was historically focused more on spiritual transformation and personal development of the soul rather than just metallurgy. Joe Rogan notes that while modern science can create gold through particle accelerators, the process remains extremely inefficient and expensive. Rogan discusses the extreme rarity of fossils, suggesting that a race of giants could have existed in the past without leaving much behind. Anderson mentions Native American legends and historical reports from the 1920s that suggest institutions like the Smithsonian may have suppressed findings of giant skeletal remains. Anderson examines the massive trilithon stones at Baalbek, which weigh up to 1,000 tons and were lifted significantly during construction. He argues that the Roman technology typically credited with the work was likely insufficient for handling such heavy megaliths. Anderson presents footage of invisible etchings in Egyptian crystals that are only visible when light hits them at a specific angle. They also discuss the massive granite boxes in the Serapeum, noting that their internal precision is far superior to the crude hieroglyphs added by later civilizations. The pair discusses the Hypogeum in Malta, a subterranean temple tuned to specific frequencies that can alter brain states and induce meditative consciousness. Anderson points out that similar acoustic engineering is found at Newgrange in Ireland, indicating a sophisticated understanding of sound in the Neolithic era. Anderson highlights striking similarities in acoustic engineering and spiral motifs between ancient sites in Peru, Ireland, and Malta. He theorizes that these prehistoric structures were intentionally designed as laboratories to manipulate human consciousness through infrasound and ritual. Next, we join Joe Rogan and guest Shane Gillis as they tackle heavy subjects like government overreach and the current state of political discourse. In this episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, host Joe Rogan sits down with comedian Shane Gillis. They begin by discussing the lack of compassion in political discourse following a gruesome murder case. Rogan and Gillis compare how different political figures might react to such news on social media, noting the divisiveness of modern commentary. Joe looks up Rob Reiner's filmography, praising classics like Stand By Me and A Few Good Men. They contrast his successful Hollywood career with his current, highly vocal political activism against Donald Trump. Shane and Joe discuss the high production value of some of Reiner's political videos. The duo discusses the Department of Homeland Security, using a clip of comedian Theo Von for a deportation-themed video without his consent. They critique the government's attempt to make serious issues like immigration appear funny for social media engagement. Rogan notes that Vaughn successfully pressured the agency to remove the content. They examine a case where a student at Tufts University was reportedly deported after writing an op-ed critical of Israel. Rogan questions the state of free speech at universities when personal opinions on international conflicts lead to such severe legal consequences. They discuss the role of political activism in modern student life. Rogan reviews reports concerning missing poll worker signatures on 315,000 ballots in Fulton County during the 2020 election. They discuss the legal implications of these procedural failures and the ongoing debate surrounding election integrity in Georgia. The conversation touches on how these discrepancies are reported across different media outlets. The conversation moves to Australia's proposed ban on social media for minors under the age of 16. Rogan notes the specific platforms included and excluded, highlighting potential biases in which sites remain accessible to young people. They discuss the impact of social media on the mental health and development of children. Joe shares a bizarre story about researcher John Lilly and his controversial experiments involving dolphins. They also delve into the darker side of dolphin biology, including behaviors like infanticide and competitive mating rituals. The duo expresses surprise at the hidden ruthlessness of creatures often perceived as friendly. The segment concludes with a look at unique primates, such as the proboscis and snub-nosed monkeys. Rogan and Gillis joke about their unusual physical features and speculate on how terrifying these creatures would be if they were larger. They watch clips of the animals and comment on their vocalizations. Joe Rogan and Shane Gillis examine the physical power and aggression of large North American wildlife, specifically bears and moose. They watch footage of a grizzly hunting a moose and discuss how people often underestimate the danger posed by these massive creatures in the wild. Gillis reflects on the cultural environment of central Pennsylvania. describing a life centered around college football, local bars, and early family life. Rogan and Shane debate the merits of a simple versus a high-pressure life, touching on the shared community values found in these regions. The pair shares their admiration for the work of filmmaker Ken Burns, particularly his documentaries on the Civil War and the Vietnam War. They delve into specific historical details, such as the colorful uniforms of the Zouave regiments and the evolution of firearms during the 19th century.
That's everything you need to know from last week's episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience. Let me know in the comments which episode you are watching next. If you found this summary helpful, please like the video and subscribe for more podcast highlights.